You're listening to the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
All right, welcome back in. 5:15 from the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios. If you're just getting into your car and you haven't been on Twitter all day, which I'd have to imagine you have to be 65 and up if you're not on Twitter every single second of the day like myself. Jordan Matthews has been traded with the third-round pick to the Bills. Eagles get back the cornerback and Ronald Darby, and Ezekiel Elliott earlier this morning got a 6-game suspension from the National Football League. Let's go out to the phone lines right now and welcome in BLG, Brandon Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation, who's kind enough to hop on board with us right now. Brandon, appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for the time, and how are you?
Thanks for having me, Zach. I'm pretty bored, actually. Nothing really going on today.
Right? What have your Twitter mentions been like today?
Just totally empty, nothing going on, totally slow, no big trades or anything.
No, and I guess this guy, we're going to continue to just debate Jordan Matthews and Nelson Aguilar for the rest of the preseason, right?
Might as well.
Yeah. So let's get to this trade, all kidding aside. Jordan Matthews and a third-round pick for Ronald Darby. When you first saw the news today, what was your reaction?
I mean, I wasn't surprised in the sense that I felt like Jordan Matthews was a legitimate trade. A guy who the Eagles were going to seriously consider trading this offseason. If they wanted to keep him around as a long-term piece, they would have given him a contract extension earlier this offseason. They wouldn't have let him come into this year without one. That's what the Eagles did last year when they extended a bunch of guys. He clearly didn't fit in that same pattern. Jordan Matthews just kind of seemed expendable given the way some of these Eagles receivers had looked in training camp. Obviously, Philadelphia badly needed help at cornerback. Just after watching them in practice and in preseason so far, there was no way in my mind that I thought they could go into this season with the cornerbacks they have. So it all made sense in that time. Obviously, the timing was surprising, but the logic behind it makes sense.
You look at the player that they got back in Ronald Darby, and I know it's a new regime in Buffalo, so maybe that did play a factor into this trade. But I have a hard time believing the Bills just trading away a player of this caliber at 23 years old for a wide receiver who's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. I know they get a third-round pick. Even though I think the concept of this trade, I understand it, and there's part of me that likes it, part of me that doesn't like it. I'm just a little bit confused why the Bills would trade away a 23-year-old corner to a team that just desperately needs a corner,
Yeah, there's definitely some rebuilding to some extent going on in Buffalo. They obviously made that deal with Sammy Watkins to the Rams to get some picks from them as well. So it sounds like they're really just putting a premium on those picks as opposed to the players, even though Ronald Darby is young. Seems like there might be some scheme fit concerns there with Sean McDermott coming in. And Darby's kind of not coming off the best year he had in Buffalo. That was more of his rookie season in 2015. So I guess, maybe falling out of favor there, new coaching staff, new GM, things like that. And I think it was just a situation where the Eagles probably valued him higher than the Bills did. And the Bills figured, hey, let's get a starting slot receiver who is in a contract year, but maybe we can re-sign him next year, maybe not. No matter what happens there, at least we get a third-round pick.
From the Eagles' perspective as well, this means they have to have a lot of confidence in Nelson Aguilar if you're just going to trade away Jordan Matthews. I know it does address a need at corner, but with Nelson Aguilar, where do you fall in this argument? Because even though he's been having a good training camp, I just can't say I'm a believer yet.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you there, Zach. I was very skeptical of Nelson Aguilar heading into this offseason. I really just thought it would almost be better for the Eagles to trade him for nothing, just get him out of here. But he has looked good in the offseason now. That obviously doesn't mean a whole lot if he doesn't show up in the games. Obviously, he struggled a little bit last night against the Packers, had the drop, wasn't able to convert that jet sweep for first down. So not the best sign there. But it's there's still a lot of summer left. I don't think it's just about Aguilar, too. I think he's a factor. But you have Matt Collins, who obviously had a really nice touchdown against the Packers last night. He's looked good in camp. The Eagles are really high in Marcus Johnson and Greg Ward, and even Bryce Treggs has been looking pretty good all offseason long. So I think the combination of Aguilar and all of those guys, and just the fact that when you're talking about the slot, it's not only like you have to have wide receivers line up there. The Eagles still have Zach Ertz. They line him up there a lot. Same thing with Trey Burton. Donald Pumphrey's going to get looks in the passing game. You still have Darren Sproles. I just think they have so many slot options other than Matthews that it did make him expendable.
When the 53-man roster does get finalized on Labor Day weekend, who are your wide receivers on this team?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's going to be obviously Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith, Nelson Aguilar. Matt Collins is your fourth guy, I believe, at that point. I would think Marcus Johnson is your fifth. He's had a pretty good camp, and the Eagles are high on him. And then the sixth spot comes down to either Bryce Treggs or Greg Ward there. And I think Ward could get the nod. I think the Eagles are really pleased with the way he's transitioned from being a quarterback at Houston to now a wide receiver in the NFL. Progress he's made is very good, and the way they've been using him has been in the slot, so I think he could get some potential snaps there if he continues to play well.
Jordan Matthews was very popular, though, here in Philadelphia in that locker room. You saw the synergy that he had with Carson Wentz. You saw what Torrey Smith did tweet out today, talking about how close he was with Jordan Matthews, and he's one of the best teammates he's ever been with, and Torrey Smith was just signed this past offseason. How does this move, you think, play in the locker room today?
Yeah, it's a loss, in the locker room. Everyone liked Jordan Matthews a lot. He was a great teammate, very hard worker. There was nothing, there was no kind of off-field issues with Jordan Matthews at all. The only complication there was the contract, and unfortunately, sometimes that happens in the NFL where business decisions have to be made, and that kind of is prioritized over those emotional intelligence decisions in terms of wanting to keep a player just because everyone likes him. It's tough because Carson Wentz also loses not only a really good friend, but a target he liked throwing to. So it's not an easy deal for the Eagles. But again, it kind of just shows how desperate they were for cornerback help, and that's ultimately what led them to make this deal.
Talking to Brandon Lee Gowton right now on the Zach Gelb Show from Bleeding Green Nation. 609-919-9200 is the telephone number if you want to hop on board. With this trade also today and what we saw last night, we know that the Eagles, they improved that secondary play. That was a big thing. But sticking with the offensive side of the ball, all offseason long, I've been saying that I think the offensive line is good, but I'm not that much of a believer as some people are maybe at Pro Football Focus calling them the best offensive line in the league. Last night was not a good night. Should you be concerned about the Eagles' offensive line at all?
Yeah, I also thought the whole Pro Football Focus best offensive line in the NFL thing was, that's a little hyperbolic right there. I don't think they're that good. I don't think they're bad by any means. I do think last night people obviously got concerned because it didn't look too great. I think part of that was the Packers were blitzing a lot. It's not like the Eagles are coming into this game planning for that kind of thing. It's only preseason. The Eagles are also without their starting right guard, Brandon Brooks. They had Chance Warmack in there, so that's another factor to consider. And, look, when the Eagles did get blitzed, Carson Wentz made the play. The Packers sent extra rushers, and that left Matt Collins open, and it let him pretty much just stiff-arm two defenders and get into the end zone there for that really sweet touchdown. So, there's risk-reward in that. And I think, bringing it back to the line there, I think we need to see a lot more from them before I can say I'm concerned. But, you're absolutely right. It wasn't the best start for them.
What do you expect out of Wentz this year?
I expect big things. I think he's looked really good all off season long. Well, not so much. He actually struggled in OTAs, which was kind of surprising, but he's really picked it up in training camp. Preseason last night, you saw he looked really, really good. So I think Wentz is the real deal here. I think his accuracy has improved for the most part. I think he really looks the part. You saw it last night. Clay Matthews coming unblocked, rushing in his face. Carson doesn't even faze him. Shakes Clay Matthews off, keeps his eyes downfield, delivers a pass to Matt Collins that would go for a touchdown. So I think Wentz is the real deal here. And that's kind of the most important thing to remember for the Eagles here is that if Wentz looks good, that's kind of almost all that matters. He's the franchise quarterback. You have that guy. He plays really well. Everything else will fall into the place for the most part.
I was on Twitter last night, and I already started to see people complain about the coach and Doug Peterson last night. It's a preseason game. I'm not going to kill the coach for anything he does in a preseason game unless if he puts the quarterback at risk. But how do you evaluate the coaching job of Doug Peterson last night? And then also, where's your confidence level in the coach, as a lot of people like myself are very skeptical of him?
Yeah, I like Doug's aggressiveness, so I do like that he went for the two-point conversion. It didn't work out. And I like that he kept going for on fourth down. It makes sense, especially in the preseason game. Give it a look, get your guys some more reps, especially if they're only going to be out for a drive. Give them a chance to extend that drive. you don't need to see Caleb Sturgis make a field goal, although he did miss that 46-yarder. So I'm fine with all that. I think Doug as a whole is fine. I know there's some people criticizing that the Eagles didn't run the ball enough, but to me, they're averaging 1.8 yards per carry when you take out the quarterback runs. I just don't think it was even effective enough to evaluate what they had there. It just clearly wasn't working. So I can't really get on Doug too much for that. Going into the season, he's a lot to prove. I mean, this is a roster that has been upgraded from last year. That would mean, or that would, the logical progression there would be that the team is expected to improve this year. And if it doesn't, Doug's kind of already put the target on his back when he compared this team to the team that won the Super Bowl when he was on the Packers. So he clearly believes the players are here. If, the Eagles don't have a good record by the end of the season, it's going to come back on him. And the question is going to be why. All right, you said you had the players. Why didn't you get there?
What do you think his thought process was on making that Packers comment?
I think Doug's really confident in his guys, and I think there's some value in that. I think he wants to pump up his guys and make them feel like, hey, man, I really believe in you. And I think as a former player, he has that experience of being in that position. Maybe that helps the guy's psyche. Maybe it really helps the locker room. It puts a lot of pressure on him. And, Doug Peterson said he likes that pressure. So that's how he operates. And obviously he does like pressure when he goes for it in these fourth downs and these two-point conversion situations. I think Doug is just that kind of guy. He's going to be aggressive. He's going to be bold. And it's kind of almost refreshing when you think back to the Chip Kelly era. And there was a lot of blame dodging and there was a lot of overly conservative play calling at times. So it's refreshing in some ways.
Let's get to Barnett, because Barnett was sensational last night. I'm not going to put someone in Canton after one preseason game, but I never really got why some people were annoyed with that draft pick of Barnett, because if you look at his film in college, a very good player, and he did display some of that last night. How about the performance of Barnett, though, last night?
Very impressive start for the Eagles' rookie first-round pick. He only played about 23 snaps, but he had 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 4 tackles overall. He had 2 more hits on the quarterback that were after the quarterback let go of the ball, but he just shows you how much he was getting pressure regardless of the sack numbers. A really impressive debut for Derek Barnett. Only turned 21 recently, so this is a really young player, still has a lot of upside, and he's already showing really good pass rushing potential. He can get around the edge. He bends well. He uses his hands really well. We saw him matched up against Jason Spriggs, who's a second-year player, last night. And, for him to kind of just come in as a rookie, Derek Barnett, and a young player, and to kind of just easily dismiss Jason Spriggs like that, it's a very encouraging sign. And I think the Eagles aren't going to start Derek Barnett, but I think they're really going to have to get him into this playing rotation, because if he's going to produce like that, that's the guy you need to have on the field.
Other takeaways from last night, both positive and negative. What were some other takeaways?
I would say the cornerbacks played, it's not like they got majorly tested, especially the starters more so, but they didn't look awful, which is probably a lot more than people expected. So I think that's kind of a positive sign. The defensive line, outside of Derek Barnett, just the starters, you saw Brandon Graham had a really good run stop. Fletcher Cox made that tackle and stripped the ball. That unit's going to be huge to this team's success this year. I mean, we talk about the cornerbacks and all those concerns there, but if this defensive line is able to get pressure, and now you have Ronald Darby in here, which should boost the corners, that'll make life a lot easier on them, and I think that's what the Eagles are really counting on this year.
Wrapping up with Brendan Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation. The Ezekiel Elliott suspension today. I don't really know how to feel about this, because I'm very anti-NFL when it comes to punishments because of their track record. Just look how they completely just screwed up the Josh Brown situation last year. But they go 6 games here, which I understand is the standard for the personal conduct policy, but they've never done that before. And they claim to have evidence. Ezekiel Elliott's camp says that their evidence is erroneous and it's not factual. Who do you believe in this situation, and just your thoughts on the overall situation?
Well, the NFL, they did spend a year, and I think I heard Adam Schefter say they spent, over hundreds of thousands of dollars looking into this thing. So it's not like there was a hasty decision made. In any case, this was a very deliberate and thoughtful process, no matter where you stand. I think, there's going to be an appeal. Obviously, Zeke's side feels like they have a strong case. Meanwhile, the NFL feels like they have a pretty strong case, as you saw in the statement that they released. So it's kind of interesting from that sense. I really get the feeling that this 6-game suspension is hardly the end of this whole situation. We're probably going to see a lot more back and forth. Zeke really fighting this as hard as he can. And he really for the Cowboys' sake, he really needs to, because this is a huge loss for them. Even if he misses one game, that could be the difference in a very close NFC playoff race. Now, all of a sudden, he's potentially missing 6 games. I think the Cowboys won't be a terrible team suddenly by any means, but they're not going to win 13 games again. They're really poised to take a step back this year, especially if Zeke is out.
Does this open up the door for the Eagles to make the playoffs?
I think the door was already open, because I think Zeke or not, every team in the NFC East has really taken a step back. Not to the point, again, where they're suddenly bad teams, but I just think the Eagles move forward. The other teams move backward a little bit at least, and I think the gap closed. So I think by that alone, I think the Eagles are in the mix. And, now they have Ronald Darby all of a sudden. Their cornerback situation is upgraded, and that's a pretty good sign.
How did the Giants take a step back? Just wonder.
I think, you look at their offensive line, and everyone wants to talk about the weapons they got, but I think the offensive line is still not very good. And Eli Manning is only getting older, and he didn't have a good season last year. And if that offensive line isn't any good, I'm kind of concerned about that.
One more thing, though, that I'll ask you on the whole Ezekiel Elliott situation. Jerry Jones in this situation looks very naive, because he said it wasn't a he said, she said incident. It clearly was a he said, she said incident. And then he also says that his player was never going to get suspended, and then he gets the 6 games. Did Jerry Jones just think that his clout in the NFL was probably going to get his player off this one?
It's a very fair question to ask. Jerry Jones does have a lot of pull, obviously, in the league. Been around forever. He's a Hall of Famer, now. So it was kind of interesting there to see him be so definitive in this whole process about the fact that, there's nothing that proves Elliott was guilty, and there's nothing really to book him with. And now the NFL comes down with this 6-game suspension. Originally it sounded like it was only going to be 1 or 2 games, but now it's a lot harsher. I really have to think he's not loving that too much.
It seems like Jerry Jones must have not been really paying that much close attention to Deflategate, because that was another thing, and I'm not comparing the incidents of Deflategate and then also the domestic abuse situation, because one's clearly a heinous act compared to something that is very trivial, but the NFL just had more probable than not on Tom Brady. They never had, that concrete evidence. They altered a lot of the facts in this case with their Weak Wells report, but this was something that the NFL has proved before. They don't need definitive evidence to come down with a suspension like this.
Absolutely, and we have to remember, this isn't the court of law when it comes to these NFL suspensions. It's under the personal conduct policy. That's the league's, the players agree to that in the CBA that they sign and ratify, they sign off on. So they've agreed to these terms, and now, it puts Roger Goodell in the position where he has the power to make a final call and to lead an investigation of their own and go beyond what the law says and kind of determine how Zeke's actions off the field affect the league, and how he feels he needs to protect the shield and the branding and everything like that, and make sure a player is punished if he feels like some kind of rules or something there was violated.
Hey, I'm really conflicted on this, because before you came on, I said that I believe if I had to make a decision, I believe the NFL in this case, because that they gave him the 6 games. They claim to have this evidence. Maybe they'll release that evidence if this turns out to be a litigious situation. But I can't say I have 110% certainty with the NFL, just seeing the way that they've botched some of these cases in the past.
Yeah, and honestly, we could easily see this thing reduced if we're just going based on how things have worked in the past. Greg Hardy, he was supposed to get 10 games, I believe, at first when he'd come back, and then that got knocked down. So we've seen it before where maybe that's deliberate even too, as speculation on my part, where the NFL wants to give an initial harsh ruling and then maybe cut it down to kind of compromise between, what Jerry Jones wants, and having to give the image of punishing a player.
Brandon, great stuff. We appreciate the insight as always.
Thanks, Zach.